Hello, my name is Alex Borucki, and this is part of the series Latin American Clips, Cortos Latinoamericanos. Here we are with Jose Torres, who is a doctoral candidate in the UCI Department of Criminology, Law and Society. His research focuses on the criminalization of undocumented communities here in the United States, specifically people from El Salvador. Hello, Jose.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to finally meet you face to face, even under these circumstances. Uh, First, I want to ask you about how is your research on the experience of Salvadorian deportees after being deported from the United States. How did you conduct this research?
Yeah, definitely. So, in growing up as a Salvadoran man who was born here, I always knew the privilege I had to be a U.S. citizen. But all around me, there were many Salvadoran men who were non-citizens, who were legal permanent residents, undocumented, temporary protected status, just different immigration statuses. So growing up, I wanted to understand the immigrant experience as a child of immigrants from El Salvador. And so growing up, I remember as a child going to downtown LA and picking up a cousin that just migrated here from El Salvador, or an uncle, right? And and then I would look at their life here in the United States and the difficult all the difficultness and the trials they experience because of their immigration status, to then hear of some uncles and family members being detained in immigration detention center, and then being told that they're going to get deported and then being sent back to El Salvador. So I would all my life as a child, I wanted to understand what was going on, what immigration laws allowed this, and what it led in their families, the disruption of the family, children here, children over there, fathers and just the family, just the families, the family being disrupted because of immigration laws. And so the project came about my own personal experiences with experiencing a lot of separation in family. And so I proposed a project. I said, I want to study the experiences of deported fathers. I want to understand how it is to be deported and be separated from your family. But I also wanted to understand immigrant fathers here in the United States and how they left their children back home. So it's kind of a dual process here where there's deported fathers in El Salvador who left children here in the United States or eventually had new children in El Salvador, but also immigrant fathers here in the United States who still had children back in El Salvador. And there have been many, many years since they had seen each other. So that was kind of how the project came about. And so I went ahead and I proposed this project, and it was approved. And back in I believe it was 2019. It's just been a crazy year. I'm trying to remember. But in 2019, September of 2019, I left with my wife and said, we're leaving to El Salvador. We're going to go interview fathers. Um, I don't know many of them, but I'm sure they're gonna, if they want to talk to me, they'll talk to me. And to my surprise, when I got there, I met a couple fathers, and little by little they began to trust me, because you can't just go in there and say, trust me with your story, trust me with your experiences. Because what I noticed in El Salvador was that a lot of TV, a lot of news, a lot of documentaries, a lot of people would go there and interview them, and they would say, what do I get out of it? $10? Or what do I get out of this? Right? You're just interviewing me, and then you leave and you don't come back and help me. So I began to understand that they trusted me because I was a child of Salvadoran immigrants. And they told me many times, if you were a different ethnicity or a different race or different, you were just not Salvadoran at all, I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't even talk to you. And so I had to build this rapport. I had to build this relationship with the fathers so they could trust me. So they could trust me with their stories. They're very, very, um, very personal experiences that I can get into. But So I built that relationship with the fathers at the beginning so they can trust me. And then I built the relationship with organizations so they can allow me to interview people there. I got a little bit nervous when I heard from some fathers that I could be perceived as law enforcement, or I could be perceived as uh, part of a gang trying to get information. But I always had to remind them, I'm just a student. I'm trying to understand your experiences because I do want to I do want to help you change something in the United States so this doesn't continue to happen because it's disrupting families. And so over time, I was able to interview 40 fathers, and some mothers said, I want to share my story too. So I got a couple interviews with mothers. And the purpose why I focused on fathers was there is some literature on mothers, and it's awesome. We still need more. But I was noticing that there was a gap in the literature with fathers, and especially in regards to gender, masculinity, fathering, what it meant to be a father, what it meant to be a man. And so I was able to interview 40 fathers in El Salvador. They were all deported. They had all lived a number of years in the United States. Some lived in Mexico, but ultimately they were all deported to El Salvador. And they had either tried to go back or they just said, I'm going to stay here till the laws change in the United States. So there was many things that came out from these interviews. A lot of them talked about what it meant to be a man, how these laws prevented them from being men and fathers, especially the fact that they couldn't be with their children. And I think we assume that many of these men would not get emotional, but most of the time I had her carry around tissues because as soon as they touched upon the topic of their children, they just began to cry. And I thought going into it that as a man, interviewing another man, they would hold back. They wouldn't want to show that. But they just poured out their emotions. They cried. And I had to stop the interview and tell them let's take a minute here and just I would ask them, do you want to continue or are you okay? But I know it's a very emotional topic, especially when you've ripped apart a family with the parents separated in different countries and a lot of the children had a lot of resentment towards their fathers because of the situation. A lot of children blamed their parents because they couldn't continue school or they couldn't get that job that they wanted or that career because they had to start working because dad was no longer in the family, and so they had to provide and help their mothers. And so there was a lot of different scenarios. There's people deported from all over the United States, from Chicago to New York, Los Angeles, Texas, all over the United States, but they all came back to El Salvador where they were born. They all had different immigration statuses. A lot of them were undocumented, the majority. And then we had a lot of that were temporary protected status. They once had temporary protected status, but it was removed. And a lot of them were illegal permanent residents that had been deported. And so it was just a spectrum of people from different immigration statuses, different experiences, the number of years they had lived in the United States, the number of children they had. And a lot of them, what I noticed was that they created new families in El Salvador. A lot of them said, how do you expect me to live by myself here? So they started new romantic relationships and had new children. And a lot of them had new children and even had grandchildren. And they would oftentimes tell me, I'm going to show my son or my daughter or my grandchildren the love that I could never show my children back in the United States. And so it was a lot. I learned a lot about families and the disruption of families and the pain that the children go through when you rip apart a family. And so that's what I did in El Salvador and just the experiences. There were some families that had been separated more than once. There was one particular family that the parents left their children in El Salvador and they came to the United States. They had a child here, and then they were all deported back. And now they're all together, and then they get a family petition approved. And now the father and some of the children come back to the United States. And what happens? Some of them stay in El Salvador, and some are here in the United States. So it's just what I learned about this is not just a one-time thing where you just separate a father, and that's it. But there's continual family separation that happens throughout their life, not just once, especially when they try to go back and then they get deported back. And so there was a lot of deportation, a lot of family separation throughout the time. And then in the United States, I interviewed 40 fathers as well, who were all of them were non-citizens, so they were either undocumented, they had DACA, they were TPS, temporary protected status, and legal permanent residence. And so I interviewed 40 fathers throughout the United States. I finished my project as soon as COVID hit, so I was able to meet with a lot of fathers before that. But as soon as COVID-19 hit, I was wrapping up my collecting my research and interviews. But what I gathered from the United States was a lot of them did have children back in El Salvador. Many of their children were grown up now, so a lot of them were grandfathers, and they hadn't seen their children in a very long time, specifically those who were undocumented. Those with TPS could go back with advanced parole and visit, but it wasn't the same to visit every once in a while. Legal permanent residents can visit and also petition, but also many of them hadn't seen their children in a very long time. There were a lot of fathers who, in order to have a family back together, they paid coyotes, they paid human smugglers to reunite their families. One father paid $24,000 to bring all his children and his wife. And this is not uncommon, right? It's very common because the immigration laws in place don't allow an undocumented father to petition children. So what do? They resort to this type of actions and take it upon themselves and pay a human smuggler thousands of dollars to bring their family so they can be together again. And so that happened a lot in my research. A lot of fathers either did it the legal way or they found other ways to bring their family back together. And so it was definitely, I learned a lot from these two different groups of fathers. There was a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, but interestingly, the way they perceive their future, many of them were uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen, especially under the current presidential administration. They said, I might not, I might go back to El Salvador. So I'm going to start preparing. I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to buy land. I'm going to prepare over there because my future might be over there. But many fathers, even those who are undocumented, said, my future is here. My children were born here. So everything, my future is here. Whatever it takes, my future is here. And if I get deported, I'll come right back because I have family here. That means everything to me. So based on my two experiences with two different groups of fathers, they were all born in El Salvador. They weren't any different, but the fact that some were deported and some were not was the major difference in their experiences. But that's kind of how I kind of led the project, and I'm currently writing my dissertation right now as we speak, and just listening to their experiences is incredible. How they persevere, they don't give up, and they'll do anything for their families.
Thank you. This is very moving, indeed, to hear you recount this. And now, as you mentioned, in part this, and as we are here in December 2020, I want to ask you how you think if the change in the White House next month in January, will impact the lives of the people whose life you have studied.
Yeah. So one thing that I found very interesting in El Salvador was how closely they follow the politics and the government here. Some jokingly told me, I don't watch CNN in El Salvador, I watch CNN the United States. And all they watch is the news from the United States. And if possible, they'll watch everything from the United States. So when I was there, Donald Trump was already president. And a lot of them had a lot of maybe not too favorable things to say about him. They're very critical of him. Interestingly, some said the law is the law, and if that's the law, that's what we have to do. So I noticed that a lot of fathers were either against him or were in favor of him, or some just said, that's what it is, right? But moving forward, I think there is optimism because there is going to be a change in presidents, and so a different administration, a different political party. And so I believe that if I were to speak to the fathers, and I've talked to a few since then, they're very optimistic about the future. Most of the fathers said the law that I would like. At the end of my interview, I told them, what is a new law you would like to see? If you were a policymaker, if you were someone in government, what's a new law that you would like to create? And for the most part, all of them said, I would like there to be a law where I can return to be with my family. All the fathers who were deported. And the ones that were here said, I would like there to be a law where I can reunite with my children, even though I'm undocumented. So I think the fact that there's a new political party that many have said is more favorable to immigrants, there is optimism that there will be change in the laws, and there will most likely be family reunification efforts rather than family separation efforts that are currently in place. As we know, previous administrations have also, there's this argument in the literature, right, that most administrations have participated in the deportation of mothers and fathers. But there is optimism now with a change in presidential administration that there will be more favorable family reunification efforts for people in El Salvador. And they're waiting to reunite with their families. They're hoping that very soon they'll be able to see their children and their partners, their romantic partners again. And that's their hope. So they're watching very closely starting January about what's going to happen. Fathers here, I imagine, are just checking every day on TPS. TPS is about to terminate. There's changes in DACA all the time, and so the fathers here are watching the news, are watching what's happening in the government, but also know that there's a lot of people in El Salvador also watching what's going to happen, and their hope is hopefully I can return back, I can be with my family again, and they just hope the United States gives them one more chance to be back here with their families.
Well, thank you, Jose. Muchas gracias for your work. This is honestly amazing. I knew a little bit of your work, but not as in this extension, and I hope the people watching this clip will appreciate as well. Well, that's all for today. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye-bye.